Yeah, no, thank you, Jerry. Always nice to be able to show the public a fly or two. Thanks everyone for tuning in on St. Patty's Day. But today we're gonna go over, like Jerry said, a pretty well known fly for swinging for whether it be steelhead or salmon. But traditionally, it's one of them anadromous fish species. It comes out of the Pacific Northwest. It's fairly fishy. It's been around a long time. You'll see it in a lot of fly shops. Before I go into tying, though, I do want to just show a couple variations of this fly. I tie it in a couple different styles, and you can definitely take this pattern and mold it to your style of tying, or adjust it for where you fish, or for high water, dirty water, and then colors. So I kind of want to start off with the real basic, the way the fly is supposed to look, the way you'll see it in a fly shop, and it's usually tied fairly sparse. So right here we have pretty much it's the black with the green butt to it, which is what was first produced, or one of the first color tones of this fly. And this one's pretty basic. It's got a chartreuse dubbed body. So you can show this here. And it's got a little bit of guinea palmered through that body. And then you have some marabou that's lightly palmered around the shank. And it's, dressed as heavily as you think you need it to be. Originally, the fly is dressed pretty light. You can do two tones of marabou or just a single. And then there's some Amherst, Lady Amherst feathers, which I don't know if you need a reason to buy Lady Amherst, this fly could be it. But it's that really cool big feather in the fly shop that costs a lot of money, which is always fun to buy. Give yourself a reason. But that is that fly, and it can be tied very sparsely. Now, we do have a couple variations that I tie. You could add the same fly in a little bigger profile, so pretty much depending on the size of the shank. And you can add weight to it. So this one's got some pink lead eyes, and these are relatively small eyes. These would fall in the smaller mini size. We don't need a ton of weight around here. If you have the appropriate sink tip, depending on how your fishing style is. And then two, this a little longer. It's got blue guinea in the belt or throughout the body. And then that's two colors of marabou, like a fluorescent reddish pink with a black over. And I had some flash in this fly. You can see a couple strands of flash go along with the Lady Amherst feathers. And the first fly comes in around 2.5 inches. That one's a little closer to 3, which seems to be a pretty good size fly for our rivers. And then we have a little smaller version here. And this one actually has a little chenille bump in the front. And so what that does, it kind of gives us that egg sucking leech version. It's just one more way to do it. Our fish do cannon eggs, and every once in a while you got to put an egg in front of the fly, and it works. And then I've got my classic, just black and blues. That there with blue with a little black undertone. And then in the springtime, which you really can't get out there and not fish it, a little pink and orange. It's hard not to fish this time of year, especially in the spring. But you can tie this fly in a wide array of colors. You can go with the white and olive options for your minnow patterns. You can, as many colors of marabou you can find, and you can pretty much add different dubbings in. You can put little hot butts on the fly. Some people would definitely put a green or a pink dot on the back end of that fly. But without going into too much more detail, I'm going to tie one for everyone to see. And if anyone has an issue with any of the steps, please, we're taking questions as we're going. If something's not clear, put it in the chat. We'll clear it up while we're going. And then if anyone has any fishing questions too, you can definitely go ahead and take those as I'm tying. But basically for this fly, I've already got a shank that's been cut and prepped. And by prepped, I mean, you can take a standard shank. This is like a fish skull shank. With return, just a standard shank of any length, and I can cut it down however I want. So take a pair of, always handy to have at the vise, good pair of wire cutters and a file. So I'll take that shank, I'll cut it to the length that I want, and I'll file the end of it so it's not sharp, because usually after you cut it with these, it's a little sharp.
So Joe, when you talk about the length that you want, what kind of dictates that? Is it just the overall size of the fly? Do you have any kind of like ratio of material to shank length? Is there any thought like that goes into it?
There is. When I first cut the shank, I'm going for a certain size fly. Technically, the longer you cut your shank appropriately, that's going to set your platform for the rest of the fly. So if you look at this real small one, that shank is extremely short. So look at here, that shank is, we're looking at, that's the shank. It's probably about half the length of this one I'm tying on. Mm-hmm. And it's the marabou usually flows behind the shank by about half, if not more. you don't want that shank back there messing with the movement. You want that marabou to actually swing back and forth and undulate, which is one of the main reasons this fly works so well, especially in slow water, which we tend to find our steelhead in, or that perfect speed of water where the Magellan can bounce and can flow. Same thing here, a little slightly, about double the length of the shank. So this shank might be a little bit long, but also having a unique little clamp here, because if that Dyna King vise didn't have this, it wouldn't hold the shank in place. So even after the fly, I can come in and cut it again and shorten it up and then file it down. But right now I just start off with a basic thread base, just slightly covering the shank so we don't lose our thread. But this is a 140 Vivus thread. It's just their standard 140. So you walk into a fly shop, you might see 6-aught, 3-aughts. They do them in deniers, 140, 210, 70. That 140 from Vivus is pretty strong and pretty thin. I've just stuck with that for a while, but thread preference is whatever you like. But going into our next step, which is attaching our hook, you gotta have a hook on here. People use different things to attach a hook. I've really found to like the 50-pound Power Pro, and I carry 80, 50, and 40 at the tying desk. 50 for this fly works out really good. And the reason I choose this is also based on the hook that I fish behind it. A lot of times I'm using an owner hook. Usually this Mosquito is one of my go-tos in a 2 or a 4. I fish a lot of size 2s, but also that size 2 hook will fit, a little thicker braid. But if I switch onto a 4, which, this fly can be considered a smaller size fly, the eye of the hook on a size 4 is a little smaller, and it's hard to get a thicker braid through there. So I stick with the 50, and the 50 is also fairly rigid enough where if you make a loop with it, it doesn't want to just fall. I know this is kind of hard to see with my green shirt on. The stuff's green, but that loop stands even in place a little bit better once there's current on it. But I cut off a good section of this. Don't be, this stuff comes in a big spool. You buy it once, you don't have to really worry about losing it again. You have it for a while. Fold it back. I've got probably a doubled back 4-inch, 5-inch section of this Power Pro. There's different ways you can tie this in, but for me, I'm looking to, so I want this hook almost at the back of the marabou, almost where the marabou moves within it. Depending on the fly and the size hook you fish, you might want to sneak that back up and in. A heavier hook, you might want to make a little shorter. This way the hook doesn't fall out of the fly in slow current. But this right here is about where I start. And we're going to just lash this down, and I start, right in the back, and I'll wrap up forward. And you'll see I do something that some people do not do, or I should say people that fish in our area may not do as much. And actually, a little advanced, a little too far. You want to leave yourself a good little gap here from where you would either fold this back or cut this off. I want to leave some room where I can tie my marabou. You don't want to tie your marabou down on top of this. It makes the wraps really long, size in the circumference of the shank, which can make your marabou look a little sparser, or you may have to use more feather to create the same amount of bulk. So for right here, I'm leaving about I say a little bit bigger than an eighth, almost a 1/4 of an inch gap from where I'm going to stop lashing down my hook holding material. And I'm going to take this and I'm going to fold it back. I want to double this back. If you tie it in just one way and lash it down, even if you glue it, I've still seen it move. I've seen it leave the fly. And there's nothing you want worse than to hook a fish, especially if you get a good grab, and that thing to take off. And all of a sudden you got a fly back, but there's no hook. And it may not always happen, but as you hook the fish you really want to hook, it may happen. And that's going to be a sad day. You got to go home and rethink your fly tying. But also, I'm still going to glue this. So I've doubled it back, pretty much wrapped it tight with thread, and I take a UV glue, which just, it's a little quicker in the fly tying process. It is expensive. For the longest time, I did not use UV glues, but after I, took the plunge and just decided to buy it, it actually works really good. Does make your fly tying slightly quicker, and with the different consistencies, it does allow a lot of options. It's a little intimidating at first because different consistencies. This was the flow material. It works good for finishing flies or doing material because it penetrates very quickly. It's got a pretty liquid form. So right here, I have my platform to tie my fly. And the next thing we're going to talk about, because before we dub the body, we have to put a feather in here. And you can use the traditional guinea, the normal, we say hackle for this fly. It's the palmered feather through the body is traditionally guinea. Now, guinea, you can buy it. It can be expensive, and you can buy it in really good packs. Like this is a really nice piece. It came from Hairline. I've also had packs that are not that nice, where you buy a pack for $6-7 and none of the feathers are usable, even for this fly. So you can substitute this for schloppen or some other form of hackle. Something you want a little more web, so schloppen makes a better feather for this. But you can use any color you want. All you're trying to do is add a little bit of substance, some hackle in there to help break up that marabou so it doesn't all just slick back. You don't want this fly to just pencil out and be a toothpick in the water. You do want a little bit of a profile, just a little profile, a little teardrop. And also it keeps the ends of the marabou out there so they can swim and move. So that's the purpose of this. So I'm going to take this white feather here and we're going to prep it. Some of this stuff is actually the more important aspects of tying the fly. And lash it on the hook and just wrap it up, but taking the time to clean the feather off, make it neat so it does the job you want it to. So I took all the fluff off, so we're just left with our good hackle material. And then you can always take your feather and kind of gauge how long it's going to stick off the shank by just folding it around, looking at the height of it. So this feather might be a little big, but we can pull back on it. We can actually just make sure that it lays a little flatter as we tie it in.
So in this case, when you're talking about it being too big, you're talking about it flowing too far back on the overall fly?
It just may be a little bulkier. If you want a really big profile, you can make this feather bigger. And if you want to, feathers do have different stiffnesses. Guinea's actually got some stiffness to it. It wants to stand, it wants to prop up compared to some other hackles that are softer. Like a schloppen feather may want to lay back more, maybe a softer. These have a little thicker, not thicker, but they have a little stiffer stem, and where the fiber is attached to the stem is a little stiffer. You can see you want to pull it back. The end portions of the fibers want to fold and really flow. Right up against the stem of that is actually pretty stiff. And then when I tie this in, these stems are semi-brittle. I want to go ahead and place this. Actually, it's going towards the camera here, so it's away from me. This allows me, when I start to wrap it, I'm not folding the stem over in a 90-degree angle, which may cause it to snap. There's nothing worse than dubbing this whole body, going to take that feather and fold it over at 90 degrees, and it just snaps on. You got to take the fly apart. And then also too, your first couple wraps on this, nice and light. I don't have to really cinch down there. If you cinch down, you could also snap that stem, and I'll wrap it a few times. I'll just wrap this right up the shank, add a little body to it, and I'll come in here and I'll lift up on the ends of the fibers, and we'll just trim those off. There we go. And I'll finish lashing that material down, and I'll come back and get ready to dub the body here. And I guess just for purposes here, I will do two different colors here. I'm going to put a little pink butt on the end of this fly because we can. You can kind of do anything you want with this. You can make it one solid color, different dubbings you can use. This is a UV fluorescent hot pink ice dub. A little stiffer. It's got great color to it. It shows up in the water really good. And then we can also add in some, you can use any type of dub, whether it be Senyo laser dub, ice dub. There's anything you find that you like the color, go ahead and use it. That's where you can make this fly whatever you want it to be. So right here, we're just going to dub just a little section here for the butt. And actually, I don't mind if I wrap back on that because I'm going to flow the blue dubbing, which we use for the rest of the body, the steely blue ice dub, which is a little more solid. It's kind of like a mylar material. Ice dub comes in different consistencies depending on the color you buy. This stuff is actually very easy to dub the body, but you could also take chenille and make the body. You could grab a stranded chenille or something that's on a core, and you could make the body with that if you don't like dubbing. I'm not the best at it, so I'm tie a lot of bug flies. I tie a lot of steelhead flies. So right here, I'll start wrapping it up and kind of keep the same thickness if you can. I know it's going to be a little, this stuff wants to kind of slide off the thread as we dub it forward, but that's okay. And like right here, I ran out a little bit, so I'll lash some of that down. And this can be loose. It doesn't have to be super tight. That's actually better. It helps absorb some water, and it may help the fly sink a little bit. If you have it super tight, it's hard to get all the air out of it initially. One of the things you can do with this, if you don't like dubbing it, like just pinch dubbing, or I guess you'd call that almost not touch dubbing, but spinning the material onto the thread, you can put it in a dubbing loop and then wrap the dubbing loop forward and then trim it to length. So there are options to getting this done. So right here, that's about perfect for me. And I'm going to seal that off, and that's our body. Everyone can see that little pink butt. Our hackle's already in. So starting to look a little bit like a woolly bugger at this point. It's kind of the same thing. You're going to take the hackle and wrap it over the body. So for this feather here, one more thing I want to do before we continue to wrap it is we want to fold the leading edge. We're going to wrap down against the shank as we wrap. Technically, if I'm looking from this direction this way, I'm going to wrap clockwise. Is we want to lay those fibers down. And a couple ways to do this. I take my scissors and with the sharp edge away from me, I'm going to pull back and try to fold these fibers down. And if you get it just right, you'll hear it go like, it'll like tick, 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 tick all the way up the feather. And what you're doing is you're just laying getting those fibers prepped to lay flat. You can use any type of hackle, just be careful you don't snap the stem. It just helps start that process. And then as I wrap this, we're gonna make kind of big loose wraps. We're not gonna wrap right next to each other. I wanna kind of wrap this the way you would a woolly butter. Some pretty big gaps in it. And you can pull back. This is your palm ring step. We'll do this here and we'll do it with the marabou. It's like right here, I finished close, but if you notice, I don't get a full wrap right at the base where I want my collar. So I'm actually gonna back up here and readjust my steps. So I might start a little bit more aggressive or a little steeper angle as I wrap forward to get it so there's more material up near the front of the body. There we go. It gets me a little bit more up there. And I'll finish, except almost right where I want to with that stem. The bare stem is right at the end of the blue dove body. And then we'll go ahead and tie that off. And for tying things off, there's a couple ways to look at it. People tend to want to wrap that a lot. You don't have to. 3 to 4 wraps, and the first one being loose, the last 2 are locking, will hold almost any material in place. A lot of people have told me that. I used to wrap too many times to secure something. You end up with that bulkiness in your fly. So right there, I think that's
You can also end up with a ridge that's like, especially if you're trying to put another hackle feather on, that can really mess it up.
Yeah. From this point going forward, if you've got like that ramp, if you've got a thread ramp going down, it's gonna be very difficult to get a nice, perfect wraps or wraps that are tight together with your marabou. Like if they're gapped or if they want to slide as you go, the marabou is just not going to lay as nice. You may run out of space. Right now, we've got a good amount of space. In this fly, you can leave some room to finish your fly off because you're going to put that amber's feather in the front and you're going to have to wrap those down. And actually not using too much thread to make that process happen will make your fly look a little neater. You can really add some bulk with tying those little fibers in. So I'm going to do 2 different feathers here. I've got a blue feather picked out here and a black feather. And leads me to one more thing I want to talk about with materials. So right here, I got 4 feathers, 3 feathers. If you look, I don't know if the camera will show it here. This first feather, that black feather looks pretty good. But if you get it a little closer to the camera here, you're going to notice that some of these fibers are broken off. It looks like it's a full. The top looks really nice. But the feathers we use, which are just slightly down past the tip right in here, they're burned off, whether it be from the dye or whatever, but they're not there. They're not long and they don't come to those slender needle points, which are what makes this fly what it is. So going through selecting the right feather, judging the length of it. So right here, might actually work a little bit further down the stem where I get some longer fibers here to make this fly intact. And when you're in the fly shop looking at materials, don't be afraid to pull the pack off the wall, take a look at it, no matter whether you're at one of our local shops, Backpackers, Shrimp Outfitters, Mad River Outfitters. Pull it off the wall, take a look at it, get the material you need for what you're doing. Nature Spirit is what this is. They make a really good marabou. Not saying the other brands don't. It's just they seem to put a pretty good pack together. So that's what I've been buying. But go ahead and we're going to pretty much prep both these feathers for wrapping them. You don't want to leave what you're not going to use on the stem. It makes it hard to tie it off and makes it bulky. So right here, I'm going to kind of judge my distance here, which looks like actually the back half of this stem is going to be where I want to be at. And it looks like right here, I start to lose some fibers due to some of that burning. So I'm going to peel that back. That looks pretty good. I might pull a little more off. And this is where you can be picky. Don't be afraid to be picky. This is what makes your fly. This is what allows it to swim and move really good in the water. So I like that. And then if you notice this fly, this feather here has got a little bit of after it's been dyed, it's kind of like all the fibers are kind of glued together. You can take a toothbrush. And I have a medium and stiff toothbrush always at the tying desk. And no, that's not my toothbrush, but toothbrush has been around a while. It's gone with me a lot of places. I'll go ahead and I would just lay it on the table flat and I brush through that feather, and it helps just separate all the fibers, which when you go into the palm ring stuff, it makes it a lot easier. It looks pretty good actually. And so pretty much the working part of this feather is going to be right here. You're not using the top of it. So if you're someone like me that does a little bit of all types of fishing, I might even save the top half of this for something else. If you want to be really frugal, you can. Does that sound bad?
That's a slippery slope, man.
I know, right?
I'm sure every tire knows that pain, but I've got little baggies of tiny pieces. You know, you got the dry fly hackle where you're going, I can tie one more fly on this. You're never going to tie that extra fly.
Nope. You feel good about doing it though. Yeah. Like, oh, I'm going to save myself a couple bucks. That pack of Marabou was expensive. I'm kidding. And so like you notice too, like some of these dyes, they'll get in your fingers. For this process, I do wet the Marabou. It helps me wrap. It helps me keep it all contained. Some of that dry stuff wants to fluff around. If you wet it, whether you keep a little bit of water at your tying desk, you can lick the dyes all you want. I haven't dyed yet. I just use my little saliva here. You don't need that much water. You sop this, you get it, dip your fingers in water and really wet it down. It can almost be a little too much. But if you have a brittle feather, the water does actually help soften it up. And so all it does is just makes it a little neater. So I'm going to wrap this up, and we're going to put, this fly is going to be used on after the next rain. So I'm going to bulk it up a tiny bit. We're going to add all of this feather to it here. And so as I'm wrapping it, I didn't prep this feather like I did the guinea because the feathers aren't stiff, and with it being wet, I can really slick them back and get them out of the way. But I'm adding a little bit of pressure, not a ton to this. And I'm constantly I got full control of those fibers. If you notice, every time I come over, I pull back, get everything aligned, make sure nothing's trapped, and I keep wrapping. And as I pull it through, I'll take a second, clean it up, and then do it again. It's just a step by step. You just keep doing the same thing. And right there, I'm going to go ahead and tie this off. And so I keep pressure with my right hand, my dominant hand, and I just take the bobbin around the inside, throw it over once, and then throw it over again. This way I know I've got it trapped, and then I'll pinch, switch over to the bobbin, and I'll pull tight on that just to make sure it's locked in. I'll give it 1 or 2 more wraps. Lock that down nice and tight. Hate to go through that whole process and have it unravel. And so right here, I got some good length here. If you notice, that Marabou comes just past there's the loop right there. That's that's right on track. And so it looks good. So the next thing I'm going to point out here, sometimes these stems get they're like, if you notice there, it sticks up a tiny bit. I'm going to come in here again and trim it just a little closer. Be careful not to cut your thread. And let's say for some reason, if you did not save yourself enough room, for me, I'll be able to sneak in my 3 wraps, 4 wraps of black Marabou here. If you did not leave yourself enough room, you can wrap back on that Marabou. It's not gonna hurt you too bad. You don't like to do that, but you can. And so then right here, I'm only going to take about, like I said, 3 to 4 turns. I'm going to find the point of the feather, which is good for me.
And are you trying to line the length of this up exactly with blue, or are you trying to make it longer, a little shorter?
So you have options here. You can make that, if you want to just be like an undertone, you could tie it with a smaller feather underneath and make the bigger one over. That would be the way I would do it. There's no real advantage to having the longer feathers underneath, because what happens is whatever's on top is going to pull back and hurt and restrict the movement there. So usually as you prop something or stack on it, usually that last material is longer. That is a general term. Don't take that to heart. There are definitely times, I'm sure, when it's an exception, but for right now, I wouldn't make it smaller on top. And so like, as I started pulling that back, I noticed I had some broken ends down here, so I'm going to keep adjusting that feather. You lose a lot of that feather, but only the parts you want is up top here. And then also too, being that picky where you have the Marabou to actually adjust sizes, you can buy smaller Marabou, but trying to find big full Marabou has always been a challenge. So if you're that lucky where you can be that picky with your lengths, go ahead and do it.
And do you buy the Marabou Bloods, or do you buy just regular Marabou? What do you prefer?
That's a good point, actually. So a lot of companies will make what they call a select Marabou, which is that longer stemmed fiber. So if you notice the difference between this feather here, and then let's say I got blood quill Marabou right here. This is strung black, which can have a longer stem, but blood quills are usually the shorter stuff. That's what's used for your bugger tails. Blood quill is usually shorter, but I've seen packs that are really great. It all depends. You really got to rummage through the pack. Like even on these, like some of this stuff, like right there, that's actually a really good feather out of a strung pack. Yeah. And you just have to look through it, but it's a way different stem. So pretty much from my understanding is this comes more off the breast of the turkey, and this is a little more of a flank feather. So as it goes around the bird, this is all turkey. This is turkey down is what this ends up being. As it wraps around the bird, you get different lengths of feathers. So some of it's more, there's plentiful, and there's some of it that's not. So the good stuff is usually not as plentiful. I can tell you that. Did that answer that question?
That's perfect. Yeah, it's perfect. Good.
Yeah, there's a lot to buy the materials. And then buy it nice or buy it twice. They all. I don't think a pack of Marabou exists for under $5. So if you're gonna buy it right the first time. Take your time in the store. It seems weird to sit there and pull the packs off the wall, but it's okay to be that guy.
We've got another member of the Trout Club who once upon a time was our education director and our tying guru, and he tells stories about when he was younger, going into fly shops with a hackle gauge and opening up all of their dry fly necks and measuring them until he found the one he wanted. So,
oh man, they loved when he walked in the fly shop door, and I can say this because I might have a little experience. You're kind of like, really? Yep. But then you learn to understand why he did. It's like, okay. And so I've got it prepped. I did wet the fibers back a little bit. And if you have really stiff fibers and you can't get them to stay, like if you notice here, they're kind of slick back, you can take your scissors and run it across there. The only problem with doing it on a feather like or a piece of Marabou is you can actually, as you run that scissors back like I did on the guinea, you can shave the fibers right off or snap them right off. So yeah, it's a feel thing. You got to pick your poison here. I'll just use the bit of water to get it to go where I want it to go. And so I'm wrapping tight here. I'm right up against where I finished that blue off. Even I was a couple wraps back. And then getting these nice and close together also adds some profile to the fly. The looser the wraps, the more the Marabou's want to lay flat. So right here, I'm going to finish away from me, and that's a perfect amount of room to finish my fly here right now. There's my fourth. I give a little, so you see what I did there? I kind of like held the thread spool and I gave a little pull. Once you start to learn your threads, whatever you tie with a lot, I know the breaking strength of that thread pretty good. I can start to feel it give if it's going to break. Some threads are better than others for being able to sense that. Just something you got to, as you tie more, you'll be able to figure that out. But right here, I'm just going to brush this out, kind of get it all evened out, make sure it looked like it turned out okay. It does. The black isn't quite as long as that blue. It's about even, maybe a little less because it's a little bit forward, but that looks pretty good for me. I'm going to take that. And then I'm going to kind of neaten this up here, kind of get a thread base just down, because now we're going to use where we do our whip finish, that same section is where we're going to lay in a little bit of flashabou or a type of flash, and we're going to lay in the Lady Amherst feathers. So Lady Amherst, it's that really big feather. It's really cool. It looks awesome. I still think they're $27 in a store. Worth it though. I've had these since I started fly tying and use a lot of it and get ready to buy another one. But you only use a couple fibers for this. You can either use two fibers together. So they're kind of webbed. So if you see if I can show this here, they kind of, as you pull them together, they want to Velcro together. You can individualize them and just pull one strand apart, one little fiber apart. You can either tie one in or you can kind of have pairs of them. A lot of times you want a little more, for that to be a little more for the fishermen. If you want it to be a little more visually showing in the fly, you can leave them kind of together and tie them in flat. It's hard to see, but like right there, you can have different widths of them. For me, I kind of just throw them in there, just a little something extra to add in. It's
so you kind of put them in like horns on a salmon fly. Is that what it is? Or
so for me, I've seen them where they just tie like 3 of them in.
Okay.
When I have the commercial tie, when you see it in the fly shop, it can be all around the fly. I kind of do like 4 or 5, just give it something. And if you want, so the one thing, Lady Amherst is fairly stiff. If you add a lot of this to one side, it's also going to press against the marabou and fold it back. But the ends are kind of soft, so they will move. And if anything, it might have the fly get bumped as it's going through the water column because it is a stiffer material. But I think it's more or less just it breaks up that solid tone of the marabou. So I think it's a little bit more for the fishermen. But the recipe calls for it, so you know what you do. You go to the fly shop, you buy the feather, and you put it on the fly.
I'll talk while you put this on just for a second. Having purchased a lot of feathers like this, for those who maybe haven't before, I'm looking at Joe's feathers here, and they look like they're from the center of the tail, which means both sides of the feather, the quills on both sides are pretty equal in length. They're not always the case. So it looks like he's pulled mostly from one side.
So if you notice here on this one, it's really Bob was saying, if it's not the exact center tail on the Lady Amherst feather, these are the long ones that stick out like the back of the rooster when he's got it off, that's his little, it's his ornament. It's shorter on one side than the other. The perfect center tails have the same length, but the one thing I will say is it seems like the ones on the side, the one side is slightly longer than the other, but that long fiber on the one side is longer than the actual center tail. So
so that was what I was going to say. If you're shopping for it, center tails can be an easy entrance into it. But as you get into maybe using it more or using it particularly in like a married wing or things like that, having a feather from each side of the tail so you can match opposite to each other for each side of the fly. That does come into play. This is pretty advanced placement discussion here, but just something to think about if you are considering buying some of these more exotic feathers.
I'm good there with that, but I think the conversation we picked up, I think with Ara. I think on this one. I'm not gonna. I don't know much about that, but it is a cool side of fly tying. So right here, I think I'm going to put 5 or 6 in here. I don't know how many I've got, but the one thing I want to make sure is really clear here is I'm really not trying to add too many wraps to this. I want to just, if you notice, I'm like placing it. I'm just with a slight bit of thread pressure, getting it trapped. And then I rotate my vise, I rotate the thread, but not, you have to be careful. You learn to do this as you do it more often because you'll unwrap a little bit to put the next one in and the fiber will fall out. So I kind of start on one side of the fly, trap it, just go to the next side and just kind of stay on 180 degrees when I'm tying them down. This way I don't lose one. If you go 90 and then try to go, if we're looking at the fly straight on, we go 90 degrees each plane. If you just go 90 degrees, as you back your thread off to stick the next fiber in and trap it, you're going to lose the one that you just placed. And in a perfect world, I'd like to say I put them all like in a really, even fashion, but that never happens. And once you become okay with that, you just kind of let them lay wherever they need to lay. And then right there, I'm going to get my last one in. And then I will go ahead and wrap them all and secure them all. Just wrap back once evenly. And there we go. They're all lashed in. And that's part of the fly. And then also part of this fly repeat is a little bit of flash boot. For me, you can use standard flash boot. I use something a little softer. Well, different styles of flash have different stiffnesses. This is the Cascade Crest product. You can find it at Orvis or some of our local fly shops. It's a crinkled mirror flash. It's real soft. It's got a unique bit of light reflectance to it. It comes in a couple different colors. This is like the bluish, purplish version. And I'm going to take, 3 to 4 strands of this, maybe even 5 if I'm feeling really, add some flash to this. And I'm going to pretty much put it on either side of the fly. And I'll tie it in the middle and then fold it around to the next side. That's what I'm end up with here. So I've got them trapped in the middle here. Got them all bunched up. You can tie this in the round. I put them on either side of the fly. hopefully to add some more side-to-side movement as this fly gets bounced in the water. Whether or not flash works, I know I tie a lot of flies with a lot of flash. More or less, I like it too, so I put it in there. But I'm going to take this material here, and if something I was showing, I think the first one showed to me was Jeff Liskay. Instead of just trying to hold this down to the material and then lashing it down, this is so soft it wants to fold out of the way of the thread. Go ahead and hold it in your dominant hand, your bobbin hand, bring it under the fly up against the thread, and then reach over with your non-dominant hand, or the one that's up against the vise, and grab it. Grab all that flashaboo. You got it in both fingers now here, and I'm just going to slide it up underneath the thread that's already wrapped down and pull it around to my side. Now it's secure under the thread, and we didn't have to fumble around. I did this for years, fumbling around trying to get thread secured or get flashaboo secured under a thread, and it is maddening. And then once you got it here, you can grab a couple of these fibers and you can elongate them. You can just pull them and get them different lengths instead of cutting them. There you go, I've got my lengths. And then I'm going to wrap it 2 or 3 times here. And then I'm going to fold it just around to the side away from me. So 180 degrees on the side. And then lash that down. And then at this point here, your fly is complete, besides adding a hook to it, which you can either do in the vise or on the water. Depends on if you wait to dictate the size of your hook based on what you're fishing. A couple whip finishes here.
We've got another hand whip finisher.
Yeah, oh yeah. So when you tie enough and you eventually learn that one.
I think it's good. So it used to be a fundamental part of the museum's tying class. Ara is a huge advocate for it. And, to be honest with you, once you can do it this way,
you never buy the tool again. You never use it.
Yeah.
I will say there's one exception when I do use the tool: deer hair stacking.
Yeah. Okay.
That's when the tool comes back in, because you need your hands to, and even when you're tying bigger deer hair flies, you end up using an old lid of some sort, like the Chinese food lid, to get it to hold the deer hair back. Yeah. But that's a whole nother topic. But when you're tying flies like these, it is simple. When you're tying your simple woolly buggers, all the steel flies, stuff that you're wanting to produce a lot of, learning to do this is nice. And then the one other part of doing it with your hand is, once you learn where to hold that thread, you can literally place it so exactly as you wrap, and you can push it. You just have a lot of control. But yeah, that's it. And that might be one of my favorite colors for this fly, to be very honest. And if you notice, I use a bright orange thread. You can bulk up the thread head, give it that little dot, or you can buy they make the loom glues in a color now. I'm actually that's like one of my next buys is the UV glue in like an orange and a pink, and you can then add it on top and kind of really have that small little hot spot there. Kind of got the double trouble on this fly. I've got the pink butt and the orange thread head. Not that is a bad thing. And then if you notice too with it's hard to see maybe, but hit some of these materials here, they tend to really pop. I know even on that, it's hard to see it through the camera, but the Bob can attest. You hit some of those UV products with the UV lighted, they do light up.
Yeah. Oh, you can see it good, Joe.
Oh, good. Okay.
Camera, yeah. Hey, would you mind mounting the hook on that just so people see how to do?
Yes, actually, no, good, Jerry. Thanks for pointing that out. There's one way that I do it, which is a little different than some people do. So I want to, not that I don't know if it matters. It's just something I started doing. So I'll spin that out. And for me here, it ended up being about the right profile. My shank ends right there, right here, in line with the fly. And so my material is about double the length. And the flash boot can be a little longer. If you notice here, it's a little long. I might take my scissors and trim off those last couple long pieces. Don't want them too much longer than the hook, but they can be a little past it. So here I'm going to take, like I said, the hooks that I use a lot, these owner mosquitoes. They're a light wire hook. Put it this way, between fishing a lot of places, and there's a few other guys here that are part of the Trout Club that can attest to this. For our fish, I do use a little lighter wire hook. We don't have as much current here in most fishing scenarios, and our fish aren't quite as big as the real thing. Not to say that our fish aren't real. I'm just saying if you go out to the Pacific Northwest, I wouldn't use this hook. I would use the bigger brother of this hook, which was actually the true owner, not the mosquito, but the like the super needle point or the cutting points. They're a heavier wire hook. But for our fishing here with the low flow or the little slower water, the hook tends to not fall out of the fly as much. So when you're going to mount this hook, you can, whether you want to have hook up or hook down, go ahead and figure that out. I ride hook up usually. And so I'll get my loop so it's even. When I tied it in, the thread was flat to the top of the shank. So I have two like parallel lanes, like going on a highway coming off the top of that shank. And I'm going to take that loop. I'm going to pinch it down really nice and tight. And I take the hook like I'm holding it in my hand, hook point down, and I press it through the loop there. And it, usually that 50 pound goes right through. And then I orientate that hook so that the bend of the hook is facing upwards, the upturned portion of the eye. You can see it there. So upturned eye is right here and it's facing this way. The hook point is facing that way as well. And so a lot of guys will just literally open this loop up and feed it right through over the hook and call that good. 90% of the time, that's good. That works. I go ahead and I do one more thing. I throw a half turn in there and throw it back over. And what this does is that gives me a little extra security there on that hook shank. So it's got a half hitch, pretty much just a half turn and then back over. And the reason I do that, and if you look at a lot of the hooks that we use in our stinger hooks for flies, whether it be on a tube fly or this style fly, is they're an offset eyed hook. And the way that it's been explained to me and the way I understand it, those hooks are not meant to be tied to the eye of the hook. They're meant to be tied on the shank. The hook shank is parallel to the hook point, not the eye. The eye is offset opposite. So you're meant to snell this. So if I can add a couple of wraps on the shank, it's going to pull from the shank, not from the eye, which gives me a straighter inline pull, maybe better hookup. When I see a hook hanging off or if this is put on wrong, the hook will want to hang down like this when it gets pulled. And that's not good. You want that hook point driving parallel to where the direction of the pull of the line, which in this case is the trail hook material, which then runs through your shank to your leader. And then that's my little 2 cents on that. And then right here, if you look at the way the fly finished out, everything slick back, the hook is just inside. All the materials are just inside the bend of that hook point, which ends up being right where I want them. This way, if you get a fish that does kind of come in, soft to the flyer, not a great commitment to it, and just nips at the back of the materials, you have a chance of hooking them still. And if you notice with this 50 pound, it wants to hang down, but it still holds itself up. And when you add a little current to that, it stays up in the body of that fly really well. So a little more the fishing side to building this fly than just what you think. And mono works good too. I'm not a mono fan. I like this for fighting the fish. But also guys use Fireline. Roku Fireline was a go-to for a lot of years. The Power Pro for me has just been a staple. I've used it on a lot of traditional fishing equipment. So I stick with it and I've got spools of it. So also part of the reason. But yeah.
So I've got what might be a advanced topic, or maybe Jerry wants to weigh in, but I certainly have plenty of standard streamer hooks, 6X, even 9X long shanks that could easily hold a fly like this. What's the advantage here to doing the trailing line, versus there we go. Yeah.
So we got here, it's a old 3X heavy, 7X long. You can get them a nice old mustad hook, streamer hook.
There you go.
Yep. So the reason we've gone to this style, for one, I think it's a little less lethal to fish. Maybe.
Yeah.
I think that could be one of the biggest reasons. But I think before we even knew that, and I'm not saying I may be completely wrong on this, but I think safety was a factor. But before that even happened, we had trouble landing fish on hooks like this. I think a lot of fish were lost because of the leverage. This is very easily, you can add pressure and you can push out and it wants to spring out of the fish's mouth when they tumble. And our fish, if you've caught one, you notice they do the gator roll. They like to tumble. That's when these hooks don't stay. So with the stinger hook, it allows us to not only change our hooks out when we snag them, hit the bottom, or you can only file this hook point down to the point where the fly is now no longer useful. So we can change our hooks out. It's a little less lethal to the fish. And we land a few more because that short shank stinger hook holds, and it holds better through rotation. And it's a little less swing weight as far as, the fish thrashes. The fly's kind of dead. It doesn't really react as much. That hook stays true. It's almost like you got it tied directly to our leader. So I think that's
great. That's great.
Yep. That's the main reason right there. And I actually think you get better probably get better movement of the materials and stuff too.
Oh,
that way
100%.
Instead of the long shank hook and stuff too. So yeah, looks good, man.
Thank you, Jerry.
Anybody on the line have any questions or comments?
Okay, nothing.
So if you don't have those, what you started out with there, what was that called again, please? The
guinea feather?
No, I'm sorry. Way before that, the
shank.
The shank.
Oh.
Yeah.
So if you don't have the shanks, you can repurpose a lot of hooks.
I was gonna say, yeah, I've got a lot of those long hooks, and I could see myself cutting the end of the hook off and kind of replicating what you had in the bag there.
Exactly.
Okay.
No, I gotta. Oh, did Jerry want to say something? Or?
No, I was gonna say, can you go see your neighbor and get them?
So,
does he have a couple of them?
There's a couple of things you can do. There's packs of shanks. You get like 20 shanks or 15 shanks for almost $7. You can buy a pack of 20 hooks for a little less sometimes. But I keep the wire cutters in that file handy. I can take an old bass, really light wired hook and kind of bend it out, and then cut it, and then use it for the shank. And I mean, if you're handy at all, or even have a basic little tool bench, you can take a straight shanked hook and bend the eye up in a vise. Even wouldn't recommend it with your fly tying vise, but if you have a pair of lineman pliers, you can upturn that eye pretty easily, and you're not gonna damage most soft metal hooks. They're meant to bend.
What was the little gadget you had in your vise there too? That looks like an interesting little adapter. I don't know if Jerry's got any of those in the basement, but
so
he might.
So there are a lot of them out now. This is the old one. This is actually designed for tube flies. This is the HMH tube fly adapter. They made two different versions. It holds a mandrel, which a mandrel is nothing more than just a really long shank. So it works good for that. OPST made a chuck tool for a while. I think Hairline makes their own now. There's a handful of companies, and like for me, actually, I'm going to be buying a vise just to tie on shanks and tubes here probably shortly. There's a couple of local makers. I think one's in Michigan that makes just a specific shank / tube vise, because it's hard to put them in the jaws of a
standard can you just put them in the jaw, or does it wiggle around quite a bit on you?
What was that again?
Yes, you just put it right in the jaw.
Can you put it right in the jaw?
No, there's not enough tension there. If you look at the standard vise, there's not enough grab there. You go to put it in. I actually have a shank right here. Unless it's like a fish skull shank that has the return on it, you can put that in there because it'll grab it. It's got top and bottom top and bottom friction. If you go to just put this one shank in, unless you're cranking it down to the point where you're going to snap your, almost having trouble closing your vise.
Okay.
What's going to happen is you're going to close on this and you add pressure. It's just going to fold out.
I got you. Okay.
There's just not enough surface area, not enough contact. And then two, it closes like this on the shank. So up and down where all your pressure is being added, it just slides, it rotates in it. If it was sideways here, you could do it maybe, but as soon as you pull up and away, it's going to rotate. You need full capture on a shank.
Got it. Thank you.
No, anytime.
Hey, Joe, give us your contact info in case somebody has questions or wants to get a hold of you.
Oh, sure. Can be found via my name, which Joseph Beno, via Instagram or Facebook. The business page is tied to that. Also, if you have any questions, you want to email me. I do get to the emails usually a little easier late at night. Email, it's Joseph 93935 at Hotmail. And if you have questions based on fly tying, questions on materials, just anything, don't be afraid to reach out. I don't mind taking the simple questions. Sometimes the most simple questions are the ones that need answered. There's a lot to this.
And I was going to say, you're doing steelhead now, and you're going to shift over to walleye fishing for the summer, then, right?
Yeah. So steelhead season will make its final little hurrah to the end here, and then I'll transition, do some warm water stuff. I'll be doing some stuff on the lake, hopefully build a program there, and then we'll do some warm water stuff, a little bit of pike fishing on the Cuyahoga. Been actually scouted that a little bit here recently, but a few different things in the works. But the walleye fishing will be a bulk of that, whether it be through a couple of the outfitters that I work for or myself. It can be fun if you like putting some fish in the freezer, but it's a means to an end.
All right. Looks like we are pretty much wrapped up for the night. Thanks everybody for sitting in. Again, thanks, Joe, for a really great program, great explanations on everything. Really appreciate it. Everybody, if you have not bought your film tour tickets yet, don't forget that will be going on till April 4th, and the link is on our Instagram page, CMNH Trout Club. Otherwise, we'll catch everybody next month, hopefully, and have a good and safe rest of your St. Patty's Day evening. So thanks again, Joe. Thanks, everybody. And we'll see you again soon. Take care.
Have a good night, guys.